The dance that changed everything. The crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow across the marble floor of the Harrison mansion. It was the kind of light that made everything look softer, more beautiful, almost like a dream. Tonight, the grand ballroom was filled with guests dressed in elegant gowns and perfectly tailored suits. Laughter echoed off the high ceilings as champagne glasses clinked together in celebration. Sarah Mitchell stood near the kitchen doorway, smoothing down her crisp black and white uniform. She had only been working at the Harrison estate for 2 weeks, but already she understood the unspoken rules. Staff members were meant to blend into the background, invisible and silent, while the wealthy guests enjoyed their evening. She watched the crowd carefully, making mental notes of who might need their glass refilled or their coat retrieved. The party was in honor of James Harrison, the CEO of Harrison Industries, a man whose face appeared regularly in business magazines. He stood near the center of the room in his perfectly pressed gray suit, shaking hands and accepting congratulations for some recent business achievements Sarah didn't fully understand. But Sarah's attention kept drifting to a small figure standing alone near the grand piano. A little girl, no more than 4 years old, wore a delicate pink dress that looked like it had been chosen with great care. Her blonde hair fell in soft curls around her shoulders, and her tiny hands fidgeted with the hem of her dress. The child's name was Emma, Mr. Harrison's daughter, and Sarah had noticed something during her short time at the mansion. Emma was different. The little girl rarely spoke. She didn't run or play like other children Sarah had seen. Instead, Emma would stand in corners, rocking gently back and forth, sometimes humming softly to herself. The other staff members had whispered the word, autism, when they thought no one else was listening, their voices a mixture of pity and discomfort. What struck Sarah most painfully, however, was how the guests treated Emma. Or rather, how they didn't treat her at all. People walked past the little girl as if she were invisible. When Emma approached a group of adults, they would turn away, their conversations continuing without pause. Some guests actually stepped around her, as if she were a piece of furniture to be avoided. Even the children at the party, dressed in their party clothes and holding balloons, seemed to have been instructed to keep their distance. Sarah felt her chest tighten as she watched Emma stand alone, swaying slightly to music only she could hear. The evening wore on. Waiters circulated with silver trays. A string quartet played classical music in one corner. The guests danced and laughed and celebrated. And through it all, Emma remained by herself, a small island of loneliness in a sea of people. Sarah couldn't stand it anymore. She had been taught to stay in her place, to never insert herself into the lives of her employers. But as she looked at that little girl, so isolated in a room full of people, something inside Sarah refused to accept it. She thought of her own childhood, of how important it had felt to be seen, to be included, to matter. Setting down her tray, Sarah walked across the ballroom floor. Her footsteps seemed too loud in her own ears, even though the room buzzed with conversation. She could feel other staff members watching her, probably wondering what she was doing. Emma stood near the piano, her fingers tracing invisible patterns in the air. She didn't look up as Sarah approached. Sarah knelt down slowly, bringing herself to Emma's eye level. She didn't try to touch the child or force eye contact. She had read about autism during her sleepless nights, trying to understand the little girl she saw each day. "Hello, Emma," Sarah said softly. "The music is very beautiful tonight, isn't it?" Emma's fingers paused their invisible dance. Her eyes, blue as a summer sky, flickered briefly toward Sarah before returning to their study of the air. Sarah waited. She didn't rush. She simply knelt there, patient and present. After a long moment, Emma began to hum. It was a melody Sarah recognized from one of the songs the quartet had played earlier. The little girl had perfect pitch, each note clear and true. "You have a lovely voice," Sarah said gently. "I wish I could sing like that." Emma's humming grew slightly louder. Then, so quietly Sarah almost missed it, the little girl whispered something. "Dance." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "You want to dance?" Emma's small hand reached out, hovering in the air between them. Her eyes were still focused elsewhere, but the gesture was unmistakable. Without hesitation, Sarah took the tiny hand in her own. She stood slowly, carefully, and Emma stood with her. The little girl's hand was warm and delicate, like a small bird. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sarah began to move in a gentle circle, leading Emma in the simplest of waltzes. She swayed slowly, keeping her movements predictable and calm. Emma followed, her steps uncertain at first, but gradually finding their rhythm. As they danced, Sarah began to hum along with the quartet's music. Emma's face, which had been so blank and distant, began to change. The corners of her mouth lifted, just slightly. Her eyes, though not quite meeting Sarah's, grew brighter. They danced together in their own small world, the new maid in her simple uniform and the CEO's daughter in her beautiful pink dress. Around them, the conversation began to fade. Guests stopped mid-sentence to watch. The quartet seemed to play more softly, as if sensing the delicate magic of the moment. James Harrison stood frozen across the room, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand. His eyes were fixed on his daughter, and Sarah could see something breaking and healing simultaneously in his expression. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes, though he didn't let them fall. Sarah and Emma continued their slow, gentle dance. The little girl began to hum again, louder now, more confident. Her steps became surer, and for the first time since Sarah had arrived at the Harrison mansion, Emma smiled. It was a real smile, full and genuine, transforming her entire face. The music ended, but Sarah and Emma kept dancing. They moved through one song, then another. Other guests began to dance again too, but they kept their distance, giving Sarah and Emma space. There was a new softness in the room, a recognition of something beautiful and fragile unfolding before them. Finally, when Emma's energy began to fade, Sarah slowed their dance to a gentle stop. She knelt down once more, still holding the little girl's hand. "Thank you for dancing with me, Emma," Sarah whispered. "You're a wonderful dancer." Emma looked at her then, really looked at her, their eyes meeting for just a moment. Then the little girl stepped forward and rested her head against Sarah's shoulder. Sarah wrapped her arms carefully around Emma, holding her close as the child's small body relaxed into the embrace. Over Emma's head, Sarah saw James Harrison approaching, his face transformed by emotion. "Thank you," he mouthed silently, his voice too thick with feeling to speak aloud. Sarah simply nodded, understanding that sometimes the most important thing we can do is see someone who has been invisible, and invite them to dance.